Deep within the galactic core, where empires rose and crumbled like dust in the wind, the Zarketh Dominion reigned supreme. Their fleets stretched across countless star systems, their rule enforced by weapons so advanced that entire worlds surrendered at the mere sight of them. The Dominion had conquered every species that dared to resist, breaking their spirits and absorbing their knowledge. There was no force in the known universe that could oppose them, or so they believed. On the bridge of the dreadnought Zarketh, Supreme Strategist Malakar stood with arms folded behind his back, his dark crimson exoskeleton gleaming under the dim glow of the control panels. Before him, a holographic transmission flickered, a message retrieved from an ancient distress beacon floating aimlessly in the void. The signal was old, centuries at least, its origin traced to a long-extinct empire known as the Zarketh Consortium. Their worlds had been reduced to lifeless husks long before the Zarketh ever reached their sector. Yet the message remained intact, a final warning preserved through time. "Do not approach Earth," the static-filled voice crackled through the ship's speakers. "We thought they were weak. We were wrong." The bridge crew exchanged uncertain glances. Whispers rippled through the command chamber like an unseen current. Malakar remained motionless, his gaze fixed on the transmission as it played again. It was brief, devoid of context or explanation. And yet, there was something unsettling about it. "The humans," Malakar muttered, his voice carrying no particular weight of concern. The species had been known to the wider galactic community for some time, yet they were considered insignificant. Their technology was primitive, their colonies sparse. They had no grand fleets, no devastating superweapons, no interstellar empire to speak of. To consider them a threat was laughable. A low-ranking officer, his scaled hands trembling slightly, hesitated before speaking. "Supreme Strategist, this is not the first warning we have uncovered." Malakar turned his head slightly, an unspoken command for the officer to continue. The young Zarketh swallowed hard before bringing up a secondary display, listing several similar messages recovered from other fallen civilizations. The Typhon Hierarchy, the Durak Alliance, the Zithar Dominion, all mighty empires that had vanished, their homeworlds silent and abandoned. Each had left behind echoes of the same ominous message: Earth must never be approached. They hide something far worse than war. We thought we could control them, but they were never the danger. Malakar's mandibles clicked together in irritation. Superstition had no place in war. It was one thing to respect a worthy opponent, but the idea that this obscure planet held some dark secret capable of toppling entire empires was absurd. There had to be another explanation. Disease, internal collapse, rebellion, something logical, something tangible. And yet, Malakar said, voice calm but firm, not a single record exists of any war against Earth. No battle logs, no fleet engagements, no surviving reports from any invading force. If these warnings are true, what happened to them? No one answered. Silence stretched across the bridge, save for the soft hum of the ship's core. It was an uncomfortable stillness, one that seemed to settle like a weight on the shoulders of every officer present. The Zarketh were not afraid. They had no reason to be. But something about this felt wrong. Malakar turned away from the display and strode toward the command dais, his mind already made up. "We will investigate," he declared. "Prepare the fleet. Set a course for Sol." A few hesitant murmurs passed through the crew, but none dared question the order. The Zarketh Dominion did not run from ghosts. If there was a mystery to be solved, they would uncover it. If there was a threat to be eliminated, they would crush it beneath their heel. And if Earth was hiding something, they would take it for themselves. As the fleet surged into faster-than-light travel, the final echo of the ancient warning played once more, its dying words fading into the cold abyss of space. We should have listened. The Zarketh fleet tore through the void like a storm of silent predators, their warships gliding effortlessly toward the Sol system. Hundreds of vessels, each a masterpiece of conquest, moved in perfect formation, their weapons primed and their sensors scanning every wavelength of the spectrum. To the Zarketh, this was routine. They had invaded countless worlds, shattered defenses thought to be impenetrable, and crushed empires that had ruled for thousands of years. Earth would be no different. Yet something felt off. Supreme Strategist Malakar stood rigid on the command bridge of the Volzeric, his gaze locked on the holographic projection of the distant blue world. There were no defense fleets waiting to meet them. No planetary shields, no orbital stations armed to the teeth. Just silence. The entire system was disturbingly empty. "Where is their military?" Malakar asked, his voice carrying no emotion, but the underlying tension was evident. A bridge officer worked furiously at his console, scanning every sector of the system, every planet, every moon. No signs of active fleet activity. No transmissions. No orbital infrastructure of significant threat. This does not match the standard pattern of an inhabited world. Malakar narrowed his eyes. "Expand scans. Show me their colonies." One by one, images appeared on the display. Mars, Europa, Titan. Human settlements were there, but the readings were strange. Power grids were operational, but there was no movement. The colonies were intact, yet eerily lifeless. A deep unease spread through the bridge. There should have been resistance, defiance, something. "Deploy a reconnaissance probe," Malakar ordered. "Let's see what they're hiding." A sleek, black probe detached from the Volzeric and streaked toward Earth, vanishing into the darkness. The bridge fell into a hushed silence as they waited for the first signals to return. Seconds ticked by, then minutes. Nothing. A communications officer frowned, adjusting the controls. "Supreme Strategist, there is interference. The probe's data feed is corrupted." Malakar's mandibles twitched in irritation. "Corrupted how?" The officer hesitated, then brought the transmission up on the main screen. At first, it was a normal scan of Earth's surface. Vast oceans, sprawling cities, lush greenery. But then, something shifted. The image flickered, colors bleeding unnaturally, shapes warping as though reality itself was unraveling. A shrill, static-laced sound filled the bridge. Not quite a scream, not quite a voice. Just wrong. Then the feed cut to black. The silence that followed was heavier than before. The bridge officers, hardened veterans of countless campaigns, now exchanged uneasy glances. Malakar took a step closer to the display, studying the empty void where the data feed should have been. "Deploy a scout ship," he said finally. "Send a full team. I want answers." Minutes later, a sleek Zarketh scout vessel descended into Earth's atmosphere, its crew trained for deep space incursions and planetary reconnaissance. Their mission was simple: gather intel, locate any signs of human resistance, and report back. They never returned. For a time, the command bridge of the Volzeric remained in tense silence, waiting for the ship's signal. Then, without warning, the scout ship's emergency beacon activated. The transmission was garbled, filled with static and fragmented voices. "Something's wrong. We saw them. Not human." The last thing the Zarketh heard before the signal cut out completely was a sound none of them could explain. It was not mechanical. It was not static. It was something else entirely. Malakar's claws tightened around the edge of his console. He had seen planets fall, had witnessed death on a scale unimaginable to most species, but never before had an entire ship simply vanished without a trace. No explosion, no debris, no last-minute distress call. Just gone. The bridge officers were visibly disturbed, their spines rigid with tension. One finally dared to speak. "Supreme Strategist, do we proceed?" Malakar stared at the empty void where Earth's mysteries waited, the warnings of long-dead civilizations echoing in the back of his mind. "We proceed," he said. The invasion would begin at dawn. Far below, on the surface of the silent world, something watched. The Zarketh invasion force descended upon Earth with the precision of a well-practiced execution. Dropships streaked through the sky, breaking through the planet's thin atmospheric defenses unchallenged. No anti-air batteries, no automated turrets, no scrambling fighter craft to meet them. The silence was disturbing, unnatural. The Zarketh had crushed countless civilizations, and they had come to expect resistance. Futile, yes, but always present. Yet Earth did not fight back. It was as if the humans were inviting them in. Supreme Strategist Malakar observed from the command bridge of the Volzarek, watching as his forces established landing zones in major cities. His crimson exoskeleton reflected the eerie blue glow of the holographic interface before him, his golden eyes narrowing at the strange lack of human activity. It had been centuries since the Zarketh had encountered a civilization that did not resist, and every single one of those civilizations had been already dead when they arrived. A soft chime interrupted his thoughts. The fleet's reconnaissance commander, Kelder, appeared on the holodisplay, his expression tight with unease. Supreme Strategist, our forces have secured several human population centers. No military response. No civilian resistance. The cities are abandoned. Malakar's mandibles clicked together. Impossible. Millions of humans lived here. Where did they go? Keldor hesitated before responding. Unknown. There are signs of recent habitation. Functioning power grids. Fresh food left in homes. Personal devices still operational. It's as if they vanish overnight. Malakar frowned. He had witnessed planetary evacuations before. Chaotic, desperate affairs with burning cities and civilians fleeing in panic. But this was something else. The humans had not fled. They had simply ceased to be. A comms officer suddenly stiffened at his console, his dark talons tapping frantically at his screen. Supreme Strategist, we're receiving reports of strange occurrences from our ground teams. Malakar turned toward him. Define strange. The officer hesitated. Equipment malfunctions, communication disruptions. Some units report hearing whispers in their comm channels. Others claim to see movement in the shadows, but thermal scans show nothing. Malakar's irritation flared. Superstition had no place in a Zarketh military operation. Tell them to focus on their mission. If there is a hidden resistance, we will root it out. Keldor's image flickered. Supreme Strategist. We found something else. The holodisplay changed to show a cityscape, vast and eerily pristine. It was a human metropolis, but something about it was wrong. The buildings stood untouched by war or decay, the streets littered with abandoned vehicles. Doors hung open as if people had simply walked away mid-task. And yet, there were no bodies, no blood, no sign of struggle. But that wasn't what disturbed Malakar the most. It was the statues. Throughout the city, massive stone figures loomed over intersections, plazas, and building rooftops. They were humanoid, yet featureless, smooth, expressionless forms, standing as silent sentinels in the empty streets. They had not been there in the last recorded images of Earth. Malakar's mandibles tightened. Were these statues present before the humans disappeared? Keldor's voice was strained. No. According to our records, they did not exist. A ripple of unease spread through the bridge crew. Then the screams began. The audio feed from a forward recon unit erupted into chaos. Shouted commands, weapons fire, the unmistakable sound of armored troops breaking formation. The feed crackled with static, but Malakar could make out fragments of frantic reports. They're moving. Weapons ineffective. They see us. Then silence. Malakar's eyes narrowed. What happened? Keldor's face was grim. The entire unit is gone. No casualties. No distress beacons. Just gone. For the first time in decades, uncertainty crept into Malakar's mind. The Zarketh did not believe in ghosts, but something unnatural was happening on this world. Something that had made entire empires disappear without a trace. A new report came in. Another unit lost. Then another. Entire platoons were vanishing without a sound, as if they had never existed. No signs of struggle, no battle remains, just empty streets and those silent, watching statues. Then, on one of the screens, a motion alert flickered. A security drone, left hovering over a street where a squad had just vanished, had captured movement. Malakar turned his full attention to the display. At first, it was subtle. The statue at the center of the street, one that had been standing motionless since the troops arrived, was now facing a different direction. Its head had turned. Another flicker. A frame-by-frame analysis revealed the truth. The statue had moved, and it was no longer alone. Behind it, more figures had appeared, where none had been before. Malakar felt the weight of the moment settle upon him. This was no abandoned world, no failed invasion. This was a trap, and the Zarketh had walked straight into it. The silence that followed was heavier than before, a stillness so absolute it pressed against the Zarketh like a physical force. Supreme Strategist Malakar stared at the screen, his golden eyes locked on the motion alert. The statues had moved. No one had seen them shift. No thermal readings, no biological signatures, no energy pulses to indicate any mechanism of locomotion. And yet, they had moved. Malakar straightened, his mind racing through possibilities. He had conquered hundreds of worlds, fought against species with unimaginable technology, faced entities that defied reason. Yet never had he encountered something like this. Full withdrawal, he commanded, his voice measured but firm. Pull all ground units back to their landing zones. I want full scans of every occupied city, infrared, ultraviolet, subspace, everything. I want to know what we're dealing with. His officers hesitated. Retreat was not the Zarketh way. They were the hunters, the conquerors. But the disappearance of their units had shaken them. They had yet to fire a single effective shot, yet they were already losing this battle. The withdrawal order was relayed. Across Earth's surface, the remaining Zarketh forces began pulling back. Troops moved with disciplined efficiency, forming defensive perimeters as they retreated toward their landing craft. Yet the silence persisted. No enemy attacked. No resistance emerged. The cities remained abandoned, unchanged, except for the statues. They were everywhere now, lining the streets, crowding rooftops, standing in doorways, filling entire plazas. They loomed over the retreating Zarketh, unblinking, unmoving, yet undeniably watching. Malakar turned to his tactical officer. Show me the evacuation progress. The display shifted, revealing icons representing his forces. The map flickered, the real-time data feeding in from ground units. He watched as his soldiers methodically made their way toward their extraction points. The operation was moving faster than expected. Too fast. He frowned. Verify those troop counts. The officer tapped at his console, but his mandibles twitched in confusion. The numbers are incorrect. Malakar's gaze sharpened. Explain. The officer hesitated, then displayed the data for all to see. The number of Zarketh forces on the ground had not decreased as expected. It had increased. The longer they remained on Earth, the more Zarketh there seemed to be. At first, the discrepancy was minor. 1 or 2 extra soldiers reported in various squads. But as the system continued verifying, the numbers grew. Dozens of additional troops. Then hundreds. None of them registered as newly deployed. None had arrived on transports. And yet, they were counted among the ranks. Malakar's voice was low and steady. Visual confirmation. Live feeds from body cams and drones flickered to life. The images were clear. Zarketh soldiers in full combat gear, moving with precision, retreating as ordered. But Malakar saw it immediately. Their movements were too precise. Not a single deviation in step, no variation in posture, no natural shifts of weight or small adjustments that organic beings made instinctively. He zoomed in. Their armor was identical. Too identical. Scuffs and scratches that should have been unique were replicated across multiple individuals. Weapons were held at the exact same angles. Then one turned its head, unnaturally smooth, mechanical in its fluidity, and Malakar realized with cold certainty. These were not his soldiers. A warning cry erupted across the command bridge. "Sir, reports coming in. Units air." The tactical display exploded into chaos. Entire squads blinked out of existence. No enemy fire, no recorded engagements, just gone. Malakar acted instantly. "Seal all transports. Launch now." The order went out, but it was too late. The statues, no, the things masquerading as statues, were inside the ranks now. No longer standing still, no longer waiting. They moved without hesitation, without sound, without mercy. Zarketh troops opened fire, but their weapons had no effect. Plasma rounds passed through the creatures as if they were made of mist, yet the instant they reached out, armored soldiers collapsed without a sound. No screams, no warnings, just sudden, perfect stillness. On the bridge, Malakar watched helplessly as entire transports, fully loaded with troops, fell silent. Their engines remained powered, their systems functional, but they did not take off. They did not respond. He opened a direct line to the largest transport. "This is Supreme Strategist Malakar. Acknowledge." Silence. Then a response. Garbled, fragmented. A voice that was both his officers and not. "We are leaving." Malakar's claws curled against the control panel. "Identify yourself." "We are leaving," the voice repeated, layered and distorted, as if multiple voices were speaking at once. "We are returning." Malakar's mandibles tightened. Returning where? The comm feed cut. On the screen, the transport's engines flared to life. But instead of ascending, it pivoted, redirecting toward deep space, accelerating rapidly. Malakar watched in stunned silence as the other hijacked transports followed, breaking formation, no longer responding to commands. They did not move like ships under distress. They moved with purpose. They were going somewhere. "Track their course," Malakar ordered. The navigation officer worked furiously, then froze. His voice wavered as he spoke. "Sir, they are heading toward Zarketh Prime, the homeworld of the Zarketh Dominion, the heart of their empire." Malakar's entire being went cold. The things from Earth were not just eliminating the Zarketh on the ground. They were spreading, and he had delivered them straight into the core of his people. "Alert all fleet commanders," Malakar said, his voice dangerously low. "The invasion is over. We are not at war." The crew turned to him in confusion. "We are in retreat." As the Volzarek pulled away from Earth, the Supreme Strategist cast one final glance at the blue planet, its silent cities, and the countless figures standing motionless beneath the dim sunlight. Watching. Waiting. The Zarketh fleet burned through space at impossible speeds, fleeing Earth as if the planet itself had grown fangs. Every warship, every transport that remained under Malakar's control followed, engines pushed to their limits. The command bridge of the Volzarek was a storm of activity, officers working frantically to track the rogue vessels, those that had been taken. Malakar stood at the center of it all, his golden eyes locked on the main display. The stolen Zarketh transports were no longer responding to any signals, no longer following the fleet's designated retreat path. They moved with eerie precision, breaking away from formation in an unnatural synchronization. Their destination remained unchanged. Zarketh Prime, his homeworld. The thought made his mandibles tighten. The fleet's own technology had been turned against them. Millions of Zarketh lived on their capital world, and now something was coming for them. Something that did not kill, something that simply took. The strategic implications were catastrophic. A civilization as vast as the Zarketh Dominion did not fear war. It thrived on it. But this was not war. This was infection. A silent, creeping infestation that spread without warning, without resistance, without a single casualty to explain what was happening. A sudden chime from the navigation console drew his attention. Supreme Strategist, the officer stammered, his talons twitching over his controls. The rogue transports. They are accelerating. Malakar stepped forward. How fast? The officer's throat tightened, beyond their maximum output. That was impossible. The stolen vessels were standard Zarketh transports, their engines designed for safe, controlled speeds. And yet, the screen told a different story. Their velocity was increasing exponentially, far beyond anything they should have been capable of. The fleet had already been pushing the limits of their engines to escape Earth, and yet the rogue ships were leaving them behind. No, not just leaving them behind. They were vanishing. Malakar watched as one of the markers on the display flickered, blurred, then disappeared entirely. The ship had not gone into warp. It had not been destroyed. It had simply ceased to exist. Then another transport blinked out, and another. The bridge filled with tense silence as the remaining rogue vessels followed the same pattern, accelerating to impossible speeds before disappearing from all tracking systems. Are they using some form of hyper-acceleration? One officer asked. No, the navigation officer replied, his voice barely above a whisper. They are not traveling to Zarketh Prime. Malakar turned sharply. Explain. The officer swallowed. They are traveling. Back. The room fell still. Malakar's gaze darkened. Back where? The officer hesitated, his fingers trembling over the console. We have recalibrated their projected trajectories. Every stolen transport is on a direct course to a singular point in deep space. He pressed a button, and the screen displayed an unfamiliar set of coordinates. The space beyond it was empty. No planets, no star systems, just a vast stretch of the void. But Malakar knew that emptiness was a lie, because those coordinates belonged to a place that should not exist. A place that had been erased from all records, not just by the Zarketh, but by every major power in the galaxy. The nameless expanse, a region of space that had been quarantined for millennia, forbidden even to the most daring explorers. It was a place where ships vanished without a trace, where entire fleets sent to investigate had never returned. The warnings about it were older than the Zarketh Dominion itself, passed down from species long since extinct. No one knew what was there, only that those who entered did not leave. Malakar's voice was dangerously quiet. How long until they arrive? The navigation officer shook his head. Unknown. At their current acceleration, they will reach the coordinates within hours, but the speeds they are achieving are beyond what our instruments can accurately measure. Malakar exhaled slowly. He had thought this would be an invasion. He had believed Earth to be a world of prey. But the truth was far more unsettling. The humans had never been the ones in control. They had never been the threat. They had merely been the prison keepers. And the Zarketh had opened the door. Alter course, Malakar ordered, his voice firm. We will not follow them. One of his officers turned in shock. Supreme Strategist, if they are truly heading to the nameless expanse, then they are no longer our concern. The words tasted like ash in his mouth, but Malakar knew the truth. The Zarketh Dominion could not fight what it did not understand. They had barely survived their brief encounter on Earth. Whatever existed in that cursed expanse was beyond them. Another officer hesitated before speaking. Sir, what do we tell the Dominion? How do we explain this? Malakar's gaze was distant. We tell them nothing. The officer stiffened. Sir. Malakar turned away from the display, his posture rigid with unspoken tension. We classify Earth as a restricted world. No further incursions. No reconnaissance. No research. The bridge officers exchanged uneasy glances. This was unprecedented. The Zarketh had never backed down from a conquest. But there was no protest. They had all seen what happened. Malakar continued, his voice low. We will erase all records of this campaign. No one will speak of it. And the missing soldiers. Malakar's expression did not change. They are gone. The silence that followed was absolute. The fleet adjusted its course, redirecting away from Earth, away from the nameless expanse, away from whatever horror they had unknowingly unleashed. But even as the ships disappeared into the void, Malakar knew this was not over. There had been warnings. From fallen civilizations, from whispers in ancient data archives, from the ruins of species that had once ruled the stars. They had all spoken of Earth in hushed voices, not out of respect, but out of fear. And now, for the first time in Zarketh history, Malakar understood why. They had not just lost an invasion. They had made a mistake that could never be undone. The void stretched endlessly before the Zarketh fleet as they put as much distance as possible between themselves and the cursed world they had failed to conquer. The silence in the command bridge of the Volzerek was thick, suffocating. Even among the most battle-hardened officers, an unspoken dread lingered. Malakar stood motionless, his golden eyes fixed on the display. Every stolen transport had vanished from their tracking systems, swallowed by the darkness of the nameless expanse. No wreckage, no distress signals, just gone. His claws tapped against the control panel. He had been supreme strategist of the Zarketh Dominion for decades, leading campaigns that crushed entire species beneath the might of his war machine. Yet never had he felt so powerless. He turned to his second-in-command, General Vorik. Status of the fleet. Vorik hesitated before responding. We have sustained minimal losses in terms of ships, but our ground forces. He trailed off, his mandibles twitching. 42% unaccounted for. The remaining soldiers are shaken. Shaken. A word that would have been unthinkable for the Zarketh. They were conquerors, warriors. Fear was for the weak. And yet every surviving soldier who had set foot on Earth now carried something unspoken in their eyes, something Malakar had never seen before. He exhaled slowly. Have we received any transmissions from the lost transports? No, Supreme Strategist. That in itself was unnatural. Even if the ships had been hijacked, there should have been something. A distress call, a final transmission, even a garbled warning. But there was only silence. And Malakar did not trust silence. The uneasy stillness was broken by a sudden alert. The communications officer turned sharply, his movements stiff. Sir, we're receiving a transmission. Malakar straightened. From where? The officer's eyes flicked between his instruments. Unknown origin, but the signal matches Zarketh military encryption. Every officer on the bridge went rigid. That should have been impossible. Only Dominion vessels used that encryption. And yet, no known Zarketh ships remained in that sector of space. Only the stolen transports, now lost in the void. The transmission crackled through the bridge, warped and fragmented. We are coming. The voice was wrong. Malakar's mandibles tightened as he listened. It was almost Zarketh. But there was something else underneath. A layered, distorted quality, as if countless voices spoke in unison, struggling to maintain a single form. Who is this? Malakar demanded. Silence. Then, we were Zarketh. The command bridge became deathly quiet. A cold unease spread through the officers as the transmission continued, filled with distorted, incomprehensible sounds, shifting between broken Zarketh speech and something older, something deeper. Then, another voice, clearer, familiar. Supreme Strategist Malakar. Malakar stiffened. The voice belonged to General Koru, one of his most trusted commanders, one of the officers who had been aboard the stolen transports. General Koru. Malakar asked, keeping his voice steady. Where are you? A pause. Then, we are returning. Malakar's claws dug into the console. Returning from where? Another pause. This time, longer. Then, in a voice that was both Koru's and not, the door has been opened. The transmission cut. For several moments, no one spoke. No one moved. Then, without warning, an alert blared through the ship. The sensors officer jolted upright. "Sir, we have multiple warp signatures." Malakar turned sharply. "How many?" The officer's claws trembled over his controls. "Hundreds." A tactical display lit up, showing incoming ships emerging from the void. Zarketh ships. The stolen transports had returned, along with an entire fleet's worth of vessels that had been lost to history. Ships that should not have existed. Ancient Zarketh warships that had vanished millennia ago. Ships from empires long extinct. Their engines burned with unnatural energy. Their hulls bore impossible markings, symbols that shifted even as they were observed. And they were moving fast. Malakar's mind worked furiously. If these were truly the same ships lost in the nameless expanse, then they had been changed. They were no longer Zarketh, no longer anything that belonged to this reality. "Prepare all weapons," he commanded. Vorik hesitated. "Sir, if those are our ships—" "They are not ours anymore," Malakar growled. A second transmission arrived. This time, there was no distortion. The voice came through with perfect clarity. "You should not have come." It was Koru again, but something in his voice was wrong. The cadence, the tone, it lacked any emotion, any individuality. Malakar's claws clenched. "You are not General Koru." Silence. Then, "We are many." The first of the approaching ships suddenly vanished. Not an explosion, not a warp jump. It simply ceased to exist. Then another, and another. One by one, the corrupted vessels disappeared, as if something unseen was erasing them from reality itself. Malakar watched, his golden eyes narrowing. Whatever had been released from Earth, whatever had been locked away, it was not done yet. The galaxy would not be the same after this. The warnings from the fallen civilizations had not been exaggerations. They had not been myths. They had been desperate, and Malakar had ignored them. Now something worse than extinction was spreading. Something beyond conquest, beyond war, beyond understanding. The Zarketh had thought themselves invincible, but they had never been more wrong. The vastness of space trembled as something unseen stirred. The Zarketh fleet, once the most feared in the galaxy, now hung motionless in the void, surrounded by an eerie silence. The stolen transports, the ancient warships that had vanished long ago, were disappearing one by one, erased from existence by forces beyond understanding. Malakar stood at the center of the command bridge of the Volzeric, his golden eyes locked onto the tactical display. His officers were frozen in place, their mandibles twitching, their talons trembling over controls that no longer seemed to matter. Another ship blinked out of existence, then another. Malakar's second-in-command, Vorik, finally found his voice. "Supreme Strategist, what are your orders?" Orders? What orders could he give? What strategy could counter something that made ships vanish without a trace? Even retreat seemed meaningless now. Running would not stop whatever this was. The transmission from General Koru still lingered in Malakar's mind. "We are returning." But Koru had not returned. Not truly. Something had taken him, and it was still here. A sudden alert blared across the bridge. The main display flickered violently, symbols flashing across it that none of the Zarketh could comprehend. They were not written in any known language, yet every officer who looked at them felt a deep instinctual terror, as if their minds recognized the meaning on a level beyond words. One officer collapsed to his knees, his breathing ragged. Another stumbled backward, his talons clawing at his own helmet. Then the lights on the bridge dimmed. Not from a system failure, not from an attack. It was as if something was pressing in on them, dimming the very light itself. Malakar's grip on the console tightened. "Shut down all transmissions," he ordered. "No more signals in or out." The communications officer barely managed to nod, his hand shaking as he worked the controls. But the transmission did not stop. The symbols continued to spread across the display, pulsing, shifting. And then a voice. Not through the speakers, not through any communication system. It spoke inside their minds. You were warned. The bridge fell into chaos. Officers clutched their heads, their bodies convulsing as the voice echoed through them, threading through their thoughts like an invading parasite. Malakar staggered, but he forced himself to remain standing. He had heard many voices in his lifetime. Leaders, warriors, dying enemies. But this was different. This voice had no origin. It simply was. You have seen. Now you must forget. A cold pressure settled over Malakar's mind. A suffocating weight, pressing, pushing, forcing something into him while pulling something else away. His memories flickered. His mind felt stretched, twisted, rewritten. He resisted. With sheer force of will, he pushed back against the invading presence, his thoughts burning with defiance. He had fought too many wars, conquered too many enemies to let something erase him. But the pressure did not stop. It was not trying to kill him. It was trying to make him forget. To erase every memory of Earth, every warning, every understanding of what had been locked away there. It had happened before. To other species, other empires. The civilizations that had left behind those warnings had likely not been destroyed. They had been erased from history itself. Malakar realized the truth too late. The fallen civilizations had not been wiped out. They had been unmade. And now it was happening again. He roared, forcing his mind to hold onto the memories, the knowledge, the fear. If he forgot, if the Zarketh forgot, then nothing would stop this cycle from repeating. The light around him flickered again. The bridge seemed to stretch and contract, as if space itself were unraveling. Officers collapsed one by one, their eyes going blank, their bodies going still. Then, silence. The pressure lifted. Malakar gasped, stumbling forward, his breath ragged. He turned, expecting to see his officers recovering. But they were gone. Not dead. Not unconscious. Gone. The bridge was empty. The Volzarek still floated in space, but its systems were dead, its crew missing. The once mighty Zarketh fleet had been reduced to a handful of remaining vessels, drifting in confusion. And Malakar was alone. He turned back to the main display, his hands trembling. The tactical map had changed. There was no sign of the stolen ships. No sign of the ancient vessels that had returned from the nameless expanse. No sign of Earth. It was as if the planet had never existed. His mind burned. The memories remained, but they should not. He knew that whatever had tried to erase him had failed. He had resisted, but he was the only one. His claws clenched into fists. He had lost everything. His fleet, his soldiers, his people. But he still remembered. And that meant something. A soft chime echoed through the dead ship. The navigation panel flickered, barely operational. A single set of coordinates remained locked in place. Not back to Zarketh Prime. Not back to Dominion space. Back to the nameless expanse. Malakar exhaled slowly. He understood now. This was never about war, never about conquest. The warnings had been right. Earth had been hiding something far worse. And now, the galaxy would learn what that truly meant, whether they wanted to or not.